No photographs were taken, no briefings were issued. No one was told in advance, not the palace press office, not senior royal advisors, and not the man who will one day be king. On a Friday afternoon in July, King Charles orchestrated one of the most significant and most deliberately concealed moments in the recent history of the British monarchy. He invited Prince Harry, Meghan, and their 2 children to Highgrove House, his private country estate in Gloucestershire. He arranged the visit himself, he kept it secret from his own household, and he ensured that Prince William and Princess Catherine would be occupied elsewhere before the Sussex family quietly arrived. What happened inside Highgrove that afternoon and what followed when the truth began to surface has triggered a crisis inside Buckingham Palace that no official statement has yet been able to contain. Before we go any further, make sure you subscribe so you never miss a single royal update. The first confirmed family gathering between King Charles and the full Sussex household in 4 years did not happen by accident. It was planned, it was timed, and it was hidden. According to sources cited by Vanity Fair royal correspondent Katie Nicholl, the Highgrove meeting was described by those close to the king as completely cloak-and-dagger, a phrase that did not emerge from critics or opponents of the palace, but from people inside Charles's own circle, who understood exactly what had been orchestrated and why. The meeting lasted approximately 1 hour. Charles and Queen Camilla were present. Harry, Meghan, Prince Archie and Princess Lilibet arrived from an undisclosed European location, flying in specifically for the gathering, before the details of their movements were confirmed to anyone outside the immediate arrangement. Buckingham Palace did not release any images from the visit. There were no official photographs, no joint statement, and no prior announcement. The palace confirmed the meeting had taken place only after details began to emerge, a confirmation issued not to celebrate what had happened, but to manage the story before it could be managed without them. The Sussex family had been staying at Althorp House, the childhood home of Princess Diana and the location of her grave in Northamptonshire. The estate sits within easy reach of Highgrove, a detail that suggested the logistical groundwork for the visit had been laid well in advance of the week it took place. Harry had arrived in the United Kingdom earlier that week to mark the 1-year countdown to the Invictus Games Birmingham 2027. His public engagements had been planned and confirmed. What had not been publicly confirmed, what had been actively kept from public knowledge, was that Meghan and the children would join him and that the purpose of their arrival extended far beyond a charity event. Charles had not seen his grandchildren, Archie and Lilibet, since the late Queen Elizabeth's Platinum Jubilee celebrations in June 2022. 4 years. The king, who has been undergoing treatment for cancer, had made a decision that those around him described not as a political calculation, but as the decision of a grandfather who understood, with the clarity that serious illness sometimes brings, that time was not unlimited and that the children in California were growing up without knowing him. That understanding, personal, urgent, and entirely separate from the institutional considerations that governed almost every other decision the palace made, was what had driven Charles to act alone. Prince William did not know. That single fact, confirmed by sources close to the monarch and reported by Vanity Fair, is the detail that transformed a private family reunion into a palace crisis. Because in the careful, protocol-governed world of the British monarchy, the heir to the throne is not simply a family member. He is the institution's future. He is the person whose judgment, whose relationships, and whose stability the entire forward motion of the crown depends upon. And Charles had made a decision of enormous significance, without consulting him, without informing him, and without giving him any opportunity to prepare for its consequences. William and Kate were at the Guards Polo Club in Windsor that Friday afternoon. The Princess of Wales was there supporting her husband at the DMY Royal Charity Polo Cup. Whatever private concerns William may have been carrying about his brother's presence in the United Kingdom that week, and sources close to Kensington Palace suggest those concerns were significant. He had no reason to believe that Friday afternoon was the moment when the situation would shift beneath him without warning. When the details of the Highgrove meeting began to surface, William's reaction was described by those around him as one of controlled fury, not the visible public kind of anger that generates headlines and requires management. The quieter, more dangerous kind, the kind that settles into a person's understanding of their situation and changes it permanently. He had spent years constructing a careful position on the Sussex question. He had supported institutional processes. He had made decisions that were painful precisely because they prioritised the stability of the crown over personal relationships. He had done what future kings are expected to do. He had chosen the institution, and his father had gone around him. A source close to William, cited in the days following the Highgrove revelation, described the future king's position with blunt precision. Charles, the source said, was opening to mending his relationship with Harry. William, the source, continued, wants no part of it. And that's likely never going to change. That divide between a father who had chosen reconciliation and a son who had chosen the institution was now no longer a private family matter. It was a structural crack running directly through the centre of the British monarchy. To understand why Charles acted as he did, it is necessary to understand the context in which he made his decision. The king has been living with cancer. He has continued his public duties with remarkable consistency, appearing at engagements and maintaining the visible presence the monarchy requires. But those around him have watched a man who understands with a clarity that health crises impose, that the future is not guaranteed, and that the things left undone do not wait indefinitely for the right moment to do them. Charles had not seen Archie and Lilibet in 4 years. His grandchildren, 2 small children growing up in California, who knew their grandfather primarily through telephone calls and carefully managed brief visits, were becoming strangers to him. Through the accumulation of institutional conflict that had made every contact between the Sussex household and the palace into a negotiation rather than a relationship, British broadcaster and royal photographer Helena Chard, speaking to Fox News Digital, put the calculation plainly. Charles, she said, has always hoped to see his grandchildren. He is still undergoing treatment for cancer and family matters more than ever. Despite years of public fallout, he would not pass up the opportunity to privately see his grandchildren. That priority, grandchildren over politics, father over monarch, human being over institution, was what William had not fully accounted for. He had understood his father as a monarch who had made difficult decisions with institutional clarity. He had not fully anticipated that the same man living with cancer, looking at the years ahead, with the particular honesty that illness enforces, might decide that some things mattered more than the framework. Charles had not consulted William, not because he had forgotten to, and not because he had miscalculated the consequences. He had not consulted William because he had known with certainty what William's answer would have been, and he had chosen differently. The meeting was supposed to remain secret. Both sides had agreed to that before it took place. According to sources who spoke to Vanity Fair prior to the Highgrove visit, both the palace and the Sussex household had agreed to keep the meeting completely out of the public eye. No photographs, no briefings, and no communication to outside parties about what had been arranged. The agreement was not merely a matter of personal preference. It reflected a hard lesson from years of failed reconciliation attempts, each of which had collapsed, partly because details had emerged before relationships had time to develop around them. The agreement held for approximately 48 hours. Then details began to surface. Insiders close to the Sussex household disclosed specifics of the visit to media contacts, the nature of the meeting, its location, its duration, and the fact that William and Kate had not been informed. All of it began appearing in reports before the palace had decided how to respond. The palace's reaction to the leak was swift and pointed. Senior officials described the disclosure as deeply unhelpful. The implicit accusation was clear that the Sussex side had once again converted a private family moment into public currency, confirming the pattern that William had spent years documenting and that had formed the central argument for institutional distance. Royal biographer Robert Hardman, speaking to the press in the aftermath, stated the palace's position with characteristic precision. If details of the meeting remained private, he said there would be another meeting. If details emerged, it would be a very long time before there was one. Details had emerged. The crisis that followed was not simply about the leak itself. It was about what the leak revealed, that Charles had taken a significant personal step toward reconciliation, that he had done so without William's knowledge, and that the Sussex household had been unable or unwilling to honour the secrecy the meeting had required to have any lasting value. Every party involved had been diminished by what had happened. And William, who had known nothing about the meeting before it occurred, was now left managing the consequences of a decision he had never been asked to endorse. The division that the Highgrove meeting exposed was not new, but it had never been quite this visible or quite this structural. William had always understood his father as the man who would ultimately make the decisions about the institution, about family matters, about the careful balance between personal relationships and royal responsibility. That understanding had not always been comfortable, but it had been stable. Charles was the king. His judgment, even when William disagreed with it, was the final word. What the Highgrove meeting demonstrated was something more complicated. Charles had not made a royal decision. He had made a paternal one, and in doing so, he had stepped outside the institutional framework that governed almost everything else about how the palace operated. Royal commentator Kinsey Schofield, speaking to Fox News Digital, offered the interpretation that was most charitable to Charles. She did not see the Highgrove meeting as William losing influence, she said. She saw it as Charles recognising that his relationship with Harry was his to manage. That framing was accurate. It was also from William's perspective precisely the problem. Because if Charles's relationship with Harry was Charles's, to manage independent of institutional considerations, independent of William's judgment, independent of the carefully constructed framework the palace had developed to handle the Sussex question, then the line between personal and institutional had been moved, and it had been moved in a direction that William had spent years arguing against. The palace did not issue a statement about the division. It issued a statement confirming the meeting had taken place and describing it as a private family matter. The restraint was professional, the tension behind it was not. William returned to his duties at Kensington Palace. He continued his engagements. He said nothing publicly about what his father had done, and those around him watched a man absorbing a significant blow to his understanding of how the monarchy he was preparing to lead actually functioned. The Highgrove meeting did not resolve the Sussex question. It complicated it. Charles had extended a personal olive branch to his son, to his daughter-in-law, and to the grandchildren he had not seen in 4 years. That gesture was genuine. The hour he had spent with Harry, Meghan, Archie and Lilibet at Highgrove carried real emotional weight, real human meaning and real significance for the relationships involved. But it had also demonstrated with uncomfortable clarity that the palace was no longer operating as a unified institution on the question of the Sussexes. The king was moving in one direction, the heir was standing firm in another, and the gap between those two positions, previously manageable because it had remained largely private, was now public knowledge. The question that the Highgrove meeting left unanswered was not whether Charles cared about his son. That question had been answered. The question it left was whether the reconciliation Charles had quietly begun could survive the institutional structure that William was simultaneously defending. Royal historian Robert Lacey captured the fragility of the moment precisely. It was going to have to be handled with care, he said, for the foreseeable future. There was no reason why, in theory, everything could not be on an even keel. But it could go the other way too. The direction it went would depend, as it always had, on what happened next, on whether the secrecy held on, whether the relationship survived the scrutiny, and on whether a father's determination to know his grandchildren could be protected long enough to mean something lasting. King Charles made a decision at Highgrove that was not made by the monarch. It was made by the grandfather. He looked at 4 years of separation from 2 small children at a calendar shaped by cancer treatment and institutional obligation. And he decided that the framework could wait, that the politics could wait, that William's carefully constructed position on the Sussex question could, for one Friday afternoon in Gloucestershire, be set aside in favour of something older and simpler and more permanent than any institutional arrangement. Whether that decision strengthens the monarchy or fractures it further depends on what both sides do next. William has not spoken publicly about what his father did. He does not need to. The palace knows, the institution knows. And Harry, sitting in California with the memory of an afternoon at Highgrove that his father had arranged with the deliberate secrecy of someone who understood exactly what he was risking, knows too. The crisis has not resolved. It has shifted, and the British monarchy, which has survived centuries of family division by converting private pain into public duty, is now navigating a moment when the king himself has done the opposite, chosen private feeling over public position, chosen the grandfather over the monarch, and left everyone around him to manage what that choice means. The story is not over, it is only just beginning. Thank you for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.